Thank you, Michael, how this is potentially a AR opportunity. So that's another thing to keep in mind as we're going through this content. Third thing is kind of late breaking news. Some of you might be tracking the infrastructure bill that just passed here in the federal government in the last, it's probably not quite been a month. Anyway, it's been recent. And that is a tremendous, I forget the numbers, but it's trillions of dollars size bill that has a lot of in the infrastructure, energy related infrastructure. And in particular, the IIAC program is actually targeted for a lot of new scope and a lot of new funding. So Dr. Paul and I are participating in a conference call sometime in December to learn more about what this means for the IIAC, but it's very possible that ISO 50001 related work could be part of that funding, which means that we could be doing work related to this ISO 50001 very soon, or sooner rather than later. So that's a third reason you want to pay attention today. The last reason I wanted to point out for today, and a motivation for you to learn about ISO 50001 is, frankly, this might be a professional development opportunity for you. Like you've heard me say, maybe even just yesterday, but all through your IIAC experience, we want to, the promise of this program is to give you in part professional development. And this content may be of interest for some of you as you go into your careers. I will say, generally speaking, in my own career, as an engineer, I have spent a fair amount of time working on energy management systems and organizational ways to adopt energy efficiency and renewables more and more. So it is a related path to some work that I've done and focused on a lot later in my career. So that being said, I think when we're talking about this ISO 50001 topic, if you're completely unfamiliar with any of it, I think it's fair to start from the top and answer the question of what is ISO? So you can see it spelled out here. ISO itself stands for the International Organization for Standardization. This organization has representation from hundreds of different countries across the world, including the US, and it has all kinds of standards, basically over 20,000. And those standards relate to all kinds of topics. You can see in the slide here that it ranges from everything of trade, and then ultimately good management and conformity practices associated with whatever the topic may be. And basically, whatever that topic or subject is, anytime that a related ISO standard exists, it means that there's a global consensus to representing the state of that art of that subject is. So the fact that ISO 50001 exists means that there's global consensus about a systemic way of approaching energy management. Okay, so hopefully that helps you answer the question of what is ISO. Let's talk then more specifically about what is ISO 50001. Again, it's a global standard. It's focused on energy management. And the management part of it is, the short way of saying this is plan, do, check, act. We'll talk a little bit more about this, but it's a management system as opposed to a technology. Oh, do I have somebody coming on board? Is my audio okay, everybody?
Yes.
Did somebody have a question there? No, okay. Well, if it comes back, please chime up again. I think the point I was making is this is a management system which is meant to incorporate people as well as technology and put it all together for a particular organization. Some of you, if you're somewhat familiar with ISO, may have some familiarity with older ISO standards. that have to do with energy management, but aren't specific to energy management. So for example, there's a 14,001 standard that relates to environmental management. And there's also another standard, quality management. It's 9,001 that also has some relationship to energy management. But ISO 50,001 is a standard that's dedicated to energy management itself. This slide then shows the structure of what the ISO 50001 standard is. And basically there are 7 steps here. And those steps include everything from energy policy to management commitment to energy action plan, implementation, and basically the plan, do, check, act process. I'm going to just take a pause. You can kind of tell the difference there between the blue steps and the green steps. The blue steps are basically in an energy management process, the planning that goes behind the energy management process. And then the green steps are the implementation steps associated with the standard. Who would, I have a question for you all. We do energy audits. We do energy assessments for our customers. Where do you think energy assessments in this slide fit in? Anybody willing to answer that?
That'd be number 6.
Number 6 is on the board. That's a good guess. Michael, you want to guess?
That's exactly where I was going to say too, is performance audits.
Okay.
But as you see, performance audits aren't the first thing. They're not the easiest thing. They're actually fairly far up the ladder. So a comprehensive energy management system is more than just audits of facilities. It's an organizational structure and a way of setting up your organization's ethos to target these kinds of efficiency.
Well said. And in fact, 6 is a good answer, good guess, but I would actually put energy audits more under step 4. Let me explain, and that is, again, when you think of management systems and when we're talking about organizational management systems, the way to boil it down is to think about the 4 steps of plan, do, check, act. In other words, you make your plan, you do your plan, you check your plan. If it's off, which it often is, usually is, then you act to readjust your plan, and that cycle continues. The energy audit part is actually more in the planning, which helps you to know what you're going to do. So it's really under, in this slide, I would say energy assessments tend to be more under the step 4, whereas I'll say performance audits are honestly more about the check act and going back and checking the things that you have planned and the things that you've implemented and how they're doing. By the way, some of you may be familiar with implementation in terms of the concept of measurement and verification. Measurement and verification in particular is around technology solutions. When we're talking about performance audits, measurement and verification can be part of that step, but energy plans and energy management systems will include things that go beyond technology solutions. It'll include things that would include, for example, people-based solutions. Let's just say one act may be to gain buy-in to energy efficiency concepts by your organization. And so those performance audits would also include a check on how that's going for your organization. Okay, so I'm going to move on then to this next slide. It's basically just another way to look at an energy management system. I also want to clarify in this slide, again, you might have heard the term energy management system or building automation system, and those kinds of terminologies align with controls, and controls like building controls like Metasys systems or train trace systems, or different packages that literally are controlling lights and controlling HVAC. Those two are called energy management systems. I just want to clarify the term here. When we're talking about 50001, we're talking about a more comprehensive term in terms of organizational approach to energy management. It can include things like the Johnson Metasys technology, but again, it's beyond that. It's all of these steps under which you see the planning, energy review, continual improvement, and system management that you see here. And I think that for many of you, some of these things are going to be familiar. So for example, depending on your own experience, you may have actually been on an energy team for an organization, which falls under item number 4. And then for those of you that have only IIAC experience, steps under energy review are going to be very familiar. So step 6 with data collection, step 7 with data analysis, step 9 with significant energy uses. Those are all related to some of the utility data analysis that we do at the IIAC. Step 12 then is about improvement opportunities, which is basically ARs. And then you can see how once those are identified, once they're implemented, how the system then continues to look at things through continual improvement and system management. Okay, I think the next slide then is frankly just a third way to look at ISO 50001, and it provides a little bit more of a greater context to what we mean by energy management systems. So you can see in here as you look at this that it talks about culture and organization, and yet everything here is still based on energy efficiency technologies, energy efficiency opportunities, and renewables are also included. So that's what I would say for the presentation is the what of ISO 50001. I also wanted to make a point to say when you go through these steps, so basically to achieve these steps, to say that you are ISO 50001 qualified, you have to achieve each one of the steps. And to officially designate that, the process includes a third-party verification. What that means is people that are qualified come in, take a look at your energy management system, and continuously will look to make sure that it's sort of like your PE. Once you get a test, you have to maintain it. And the way that you do with the way that ISO 50001 does that is they bring in third-party certifiers to assess your organization and certify that you are indeed completing the process and in alignment. I wanted to also point out, this might be something that becomes more and more relevant if we do in fact see funding for the IIACs to get more involved with 50001 through the energy infrastructure bill. So again, remember, ISO 50001 is not a US-based standard. It is truly international. And one of the things that the US government, the federal government, has done through DOE is to try to help companies in the US, or at least based in the US, to achieve the certification status for 50001. So DOE has a number of tools that they've created, not unlike some of the tools we use for the IIAC, to help companies in the US to achieve that status. Navigator is one of their main tools, and that's just a screenshot here of the homepage for Navigator. That might be a tool that we get more and more involved with if indeed work for 50001 comes through the IIAC. Next question I wanted to answer for you all is beyond what, who is qualified for ISO 50001. And basically, if you read through this slide and the details of it, it's applicable to everybody. It can be public, private sectors. It can be manufacturing, like what IIAC focus on. It can also be people that provide services or commercial buildings. So it really is meant to be a comprehensive standard that's applicable to everybody, non-residential, across the countries that are involved with ISO. So in other words, every one of the companies for our IIC audiences and customers could do ISO 50001. Like, you know, Hill Air Force was going to join us today to talk about theirs. We also are looking at work with Merit Medical. We just found out in the last week that they are in the process of pursuing ISO 50001. So our energy audits will help to directly inform their pursuit there of that certification, which is great. Okay, so I think the last few slides I have here to talk about this topic, and again, this is just meant to be an introduction for you all to the topic, is to talk a little bit about the cost benefits. The costs of doing any kind of certification are not nominal, including ISO 50001. So you see here on this slide some sense of what that might be. A lot of times for certifications like this, what it does, one of the most significant costs is the staff time to be able to develop and complete the steps. Different departments of an organization are going to be responsible for different parts of ISO 50001, but typically an organization will have some person who's hired to actually lead up the whole effort and coordinate the whole effort. As you can see here, in the average, in a study of 10 sites that have ISO 50001, it's an average of almost one person who's dedicated to that. So that's some of the costs. And then, like you all do for IAC assessments in terms of projects and paybacks associated with those projects, this gives you some idea. I'm just gonna stop and pause before I say the next step. Based on what the paybacks box says here, as well as what the graph says, can anybody give me a general observation of the impact of scale, basically, on the cost of ISO 50001? Anybody get?
The larger a company is, the faster it'll pay back,
Yeah.
the more it will do for them.
Yep. So generally, in industry, you will see that's exactly right. And so it's really larger entities, historically anyway, that have been participants of ISO 50001. Again, it's not a requirement, at least not except for in very specific circumstances. This is a voluntary standard to comply with. So to be able to make the cost benefit analysis argument, oftentimes it's easier in larger industry. Again, Hill Air Force Base, pretty large place. I believe it's possible, I'm not totally remembering this for sure, but I believe Autoliv is one of the companies we've worked with that also has 50001. If you have some sense of Autoliv, they're pretty big. They have multiple sites in Utah, as opposed to, I don't know, like WaySafe, the assessment that's going on right now that's just above 100K total of annual costs. You don't see that happen in a lot of WaySafe. You don't see ISO 50001 being applied in a lot of cases like the size of WaySafe. Okay, so that's.
Wait, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So along with the scalability, I guess, are there parts of the ISO standard that are more management changes that would really, really benefit the smaller places without having to sink in a bunch of capital?
Yeah, that's a great question, Andrew. And not unlike any other standard, there are a lot of companies out there that will follow standards, but they might not necessarily get certified fully in those standards. And so the costs that you're seeing in this slide are from those folks that have actually certified and had that third-party verification. But there are many, many others that follow the guidance of the standard. They just don't simply get qualified. They don't get verified. They're not officially using it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. And then there's not really an incentive to get verified other than just to say that you are, right?
Yeah, that's, well, you know, there's a lot of credibility in industry associated with certification. So I don't want to downplay that it's just to say you are. There is a lot of credibility to be able to say that. And a lot of people, honestly, suppliers, for example, if you are a supplier to there are certain supply chains basically that require you to achieve ISO. It may not necessarily be 50001, but various other standards. And so some people are required to achieve the certification if they're actually, you know, a customer or part of a supply chain, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. I was just thinking, like, some of the places like Horizon Metal,
Yes.
places like that, what would I was just trying to think of what would the incentive be for some of the smaller places that are kind of more like a family business manufacturer rather than one of the big ones. But
yeah. Well, because they, for example, that's a great question, and I'm really glad how you're thinking about it. Here's one scenario I could see playing out. Horizon Metals, I don't know if you remember this, but one of their goals when we went to visit them that they were talking about is they wanted to achieve the requirements to be able to do Department of Defense work. You recall that? Department of Defense work just means you're able to manufacture and sell the products that you generate to people that use your products in creating products that are used in the Department of Defense. In other words, the military sector. And a lot of those products are held to really high standards. And it's very possible that in that process, Nick may have been able to talk to this. I'll have to ask him, but it's very possible in that process, for example, Andrew, that if Horizon Metals really wanted to be that Department of Defense supplier and have Department of Defense essentially as their customer, that they would be required to achieve ISO 50001.
that makes a lot of sense. Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to get a better idea of maybe if some of our recommendations are based on some of these standards, just how to pitch it so that
yeah, it's great.
People want to actually do it.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. I appreciate it. So the previous slide was about costs. And then I wanted to show in turn the benefits. Whenever you're making a business case, you're always talking about the cost versus the benefits. I heard somebody else ask.
Yeah, can I also add one thing about costs?
Please. We'll go back.
We talk about incentives from Rocky Mountain Power for projects, but Rocky Mountain Power also has a program called an energy project co-funding arrangement. And so a lot of times, if a company is large enough to try to justify the cost of a full-time manager for a program like this, they might also look into getting some of the funding for a full-time position from incentives from Rocky Mountain Power. And that energy project co-funding arrangement, the stipulations with it are that an energy manager has to bring in at least 1 million kilowatt hours of electricity savings per year.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And Rocky Mountain Power will finance, I think, up to the full cost of that engineer's or full-time employee's salary plus benefits.
Yep.
So if a large company is interested in this and they are going to go about it in a way that will deliver that level of energy savings, they can also get part of those costs defrayed through incentives, not only for the projects themselves, but for the salary of the employee whose full-time responsibility it would be to take over those projects and make sure that they're completed and submitted to Rocky Mountain Power.
Yeah, that's a great point, Michael. In fact, we've done that concept as an AR in previous assessments. Is there anybody here on the call on the in class today who has done that AR? If you have, what assessment was it for?
I have, Julie.
Okay, and what
Was
was
for the
it for?
was for the Kroger assessment.
Oh yeah, fantastic. I also recall that we did do this for Autoliv because of their multiple locations and their corporate structure. They are way above the threshold that Michael was talking about in terms of requirements. So that's a fantastic point, Michael. Thank you.
Yeah.
And if you want to check that out more, go check out the Kroger assessment or check out the Autoliv assessment that was from basically a year ago, last January. Okay, so moving on then to the benefits part of it. I'm gonna pause again. This is great audience interaction. So if you look at the first bullets at the top, who's willing to just generally say what the benefits are based on that information? I could translate it for you, but I want to see if somebody else is willing to translate it in your own terms, in your own words. Jake, apologies because I can see you. Are you game to take a shot at what that translates to, those 4 bullets?
Oh, you were talking about the
What is
4
the-
bullets as in
Yeah, the 4
how they
bullets at the-
translate to,
Yeah.
I guess maybe I'm confused with what you're asking.
So tell me, in terms of the benefits from the 4 bullets that you see at the top of the slide, what does that communicate about benefits? What are the benefits? Okay, I put Jake on the spot.
I'm confused, I think.
Yeah, no problem. So tell me, Jake, if this makes sense or anybody else. I want to make sure that I articulate this clearly. So if you look at the first bullet, it says US manufacturing, and again, it's specific. That is the IIAC's customer base, right? US manufacturing, and it's talking about costs with regards to energy and manufacturers that pay attention to energy efficiency. As a US manufacturer, if you're just doing energy efficiency as business as usual, basically what it's saying is generally the data suggests that you achieve about a 1% per year savings. As opposed to the third bullet on that top list is the bullet that relates to ISO 50001 certified plants. They're essentially on an annual basis about 3% higher. In other words, taking the systemic approach to energy management that ISO 50001 offers achieves about 3% more savings per year than the business as usual case. And those percentages might not seem like much to you, the 1%, 4%, or the 3% difference. But keep in mind that these are companies that are spending millions and millions of dollars on utility bills a year. So even those small percentages and the differences generates a lot of cost savings. Does that make more sense now, Jake?
Yeah, it does. I was confused at what the percentages were, but now they're energy savings percentages. That
Yep.
makes more sense.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Awesome. Sorry about that, to put you on the spot there, but I'm glad we talked through it. And then I think for today, and just again, basics and an introductory conversation about ISO 50001, I wanted to use this last slide to point out that it is an existing standard. There are steps and there are certifications in place, but it is also an evolving standard. So as the technology, as the practices, as the markets related to energy efficiency and renewables evolve. The standards, whether it's 50,001 or otherwise, are meant to also evolve and change and keep updated. So that, like I said in one of the first slides, if you achieve a certification, an ISO certification, you are truly achieving what's considered the state of art for that particular topic. In this case, you can see some of the changes that are predicted for energy management specifically. Okay,